Hi Bookhuggers, this is Jen, and it's time to talk about what we read in August. Okay, so it's the first couple of days of September because I was reading my August books all the way up until I think 11:30 last night on the 31st. So I had to wait to film my wrap up until I was completely done. I ended up getting through 8 books this month, which is pretty good since I had the plague during one of those weeks and couldn't read or do anything. So 8 books is pretty good. I'm pleased. So to begin, the first book I read this month was Shadow Shaper by Daniel Jose Older. It's an urban fantasy about a girl named Sierra who is a brilliant artist, and she does all these amazing murals around her part of Brooklyn. And she has started noticing that a lot of the murals around town, especially the ones that are memorial murals for people who passed away, she's noticed that they've started fading. All the colors are fading out and they're sort of disappearing. And she eventually finds out that she has a legacy in this thing called the Shadow Shapers. And the Shadow Shapers sort of help spirits move to another plane through art, which is kind of cool. It's not something I've read before. I loved the characters in this book. They were very diverse, first of all, and so it was kind of a joy to read about them. And I found the dialogue really sort of natural and well written, and again, the mythology and the fantasy aspects of it were not something I'd read before. So I gave it 4 stars, and I am really excited to read more about it. I have a feeling there are more coming. Some of these books you may have heard me mention in my What I'm Reading Now video earlier this month, and I'll link to that wherever the link is. And this is one of them. So the next book that I read in August was Don't Ever Change by Mbeth Bloom. And again, it's a realistic YA story about a girl named Eva who has just graduated from high school and she wants to be a writer, and she decides that the summer before college she's going to take every advantage to sort of expand her life and have more to write about. And I started off really liking it. It seemed like it was going to be a fun, sort of light summer read, which is kind of what I wanted it to be. But in the end, it turned out that there was really very little character development. She was pretty much the same character from start to finish. And I feel like the premise of the book makes it seem like there's going to be some character development and some stuff happening, and it didn't really turn out that way. So I gave it 3 stars on Goodreads. It was good. It just wasn't, huggable good. My next read was A Court of Thorn and Roses by Sarah J. Maas. I mentioned in that last video that I hadn't read any Sarah J. Maas books. I haven't read the Throne of Glass series. Again, this story is a Beauty and the Beast retelling, set in a land where the humans sort of live on one half of the land, and then there's this big wall, and then the Fae live on the other side, and there's this very tenuous peace between the two. And a girl named Feyre, whose family has fallen on really hard times, is out hunting in the woods, which she's not supposed to be doing. It's kind of scary in the woods. And she kills a wolf that turns out to be a shape-shifting fairy. And she finds out that there's this law that if a human kills a fairy, then the human has to forfeit their life. Instead of killing her, the fairy who comes to get her, whose name is Tamlin, says that she has to go to the land of the Fae and she can't ever come back. She has to stay there forever. So to start with, I did not know that this was a new adult book. I was assuming that it was a young adult fantasy book, and I hit a couple of scenes and I was like, huh. So on a love scene scale from, say, 0 being hand-holding to 5 being throwing somebody up against a wall and ravaging them, it's a 5. It's a 5. We have a 5. And there's nothing wrong with that, but I thought it was young adult, and it wasn't. I've read some things online of people who do not appreciate Sarah J. Maas's writing, and they do not appreciate this book on some very valid points, but I didn't have as many problems with this as some others have had. I really enjoyed the world of the Fae that was presented. I think I mentioned this in my last video. I'm not normally a fan of the Fae, I say that 5 times fast, but I did like the way that this was presented. It was kind of the fun summer read that I was looking for, and so I ended up giving it 3 stars because there are some problematic points, but it was a good read. It was a good summer read. The next book that I finished was an audiobook, and it was To All the Boys I've Loved Before, which I also mentioned in the last video. It's about a girl who writes letters to her crushes that she never sends, and then suddenly they get sent, and she has to clean that up. And it was a fun, light read. Jenny Han's books usually are just really readable, really quick reads, and this was no exception. I gave it 3 stars. It was a fun, quick, light summer read, and for August, that is the perfect thing. The next book I read on my Kindle, and it's Loving Day by Matt Johnson. It's the story of Warren, who has recently lost his comic book store in Wales and his Welsh wife to divorce, and has moved back to Philadelphia, where his father, who has recently passed away, leaves him this mansion in the middle of Germantown where he grew up, and it's completely falling apart. This mansion is like, it has no roof, and he has to like sleep in a tent inside the house, and he has no money to fix it up. And so he's kind of in this really bad place. But the main focus of the book is the fact that Warren is biracial. He had an Irish father and an African-American mother, and they both passed away. And he's always had a hard time, even though he identifies as black, fitting into the black community where he grew up and fitting in with the black friends that he grew up with. So he's coming back to that neighborhood and to those people. And as all of these feelings are coming back, because he's been out of the country for so long, all of these feelings are coming back. He's at a comic book convention trying to make some money because he's a comic artist. And he meets the teenage daughter that he didn't know he had, who was the result of, this hookup he had in high school with a white girl. And this daughter identifies as white. And so the daughter ends up moving in with him because her grandparents say they can't handle her anymore. And he feels like it's his responsibility to teach her about the black parts of her, even though he has trouble with that himself. And then they find this almost cult of biracial people in Philadelphia who have started a school. And he enrolls his daughter in the school, and he starts teaching in the school, and then the story really gets crazy. When I read about this book, I was really excited about it for all the things that I mentioned, because it sounded like a really interesting story, but also because they said that there were ghosts involved in this mansion, this crumbling mansion that he lives in. And I don't know why that elevated the story for me, but it kind of did. In the end, the book wasn't as great as I was hoping it would be. I ended up giving it 3 stars, mostly because Warren's character, he was a great father in the end. Like, he really loved this girl that he had only just met. And he ended up doing some really good things for her. But as far as his views of women in general, it was just kind of, there were a lot of cringeworthy moments in there. And there was a ghost-ish thing going on, but it was not really well integrated into the book, and it just fell flat. The next book I read was Rivers of London by Peter Aronovich. It's the first in the Peter Grant mystery series, and I actually started this book 2 years ago when I was in London, and I bought it at Waterstones, but I lost track of it, and I recently found it while I was cleaning my house, and I've actually filmed a review for this book, so I will tell you much more about it soon. The next book I read was Anna of California by Andy Turan. And this book I just saw on the new fiction shelves at my library and thought it looked interesting. I'd never heard of it before, or the author. It turns out it's a modern day retelling of Anne of Green Gables, but instead of it being about a girl in Prince Edward Island who has red hair, it's about a girl named Anna who has been in the foster care system for 10 years, and she's been kicked out of her most recent foster home, and she's given a choice. She can go back to a group home where she's had really horrible experiences, or she can go to work on the Garber farm up in Northern California. She's from LA, and work on the farm for the summer, and then if she does well there, she can declare emancipation. So she chooses that. For those of you who have read Anne of Green Gables, Anna has the same kind of spirit as Anne. She's very positive, and she's done a lot of reading in her life, and so she has this amazing vocabulary, and she's very willing to use it on anyone who's around. She talks a lot. There are a lot of parallels, obviously, because it's a retelling with Anne of Green Gables, and I just loved it. I loved it because of that. I feel like it had the same spirit as the original, but with a really, really important update just about the lives of kids in foster care. And Anna has had a much harder life than Anne did in Anne of Green Gables, but it's an important story. I just loved it. Aside from the rough parts of Anna's life that we find out about, it is really kind of just a cozy story. I've actually ordered a very nice copy of Anne of Green Gables to reread because I haven't read it in so very long. This one I gave 4 stars to. It is definitely huggable. I'm gonna hug it right now. If you love Anne of Green Gables, you have to read this book. And my final book that I read in August that I finished last night at 11:30, which was a bad idea because then I had nightmares, was Only Ever Yours by Louise O'Neill. I'd heard so much about this book on BookTube, and so I knew a little bit about what I was getting into before I started it, but I really had no idea. Only Ever Yours is about a future where women are no longer born, only men are born, and women are actually genetically engineered in labs and hatched, sort of, and raised together in schools, and they're raised to either be companions or concubines or chastities. So essentially either wives, prostitutes, or nuns. And they don't know which one they're going to be until the very end, until the inheritance, the men of that year, choose them. So the men actually choose the ones who are going to be companions and the ones who they would want as concubines, and then the ones that none of the men want become chastities. I've heard this book described as The Handmaid's Tale meets Mean Girls, and that's exactly what it is. It's exactly what it is. It's very much influenced by The Handmaid's Tale. But the Mean Girls aspect of it is kind of what carries the book. You don't really meet the inheritance or the boys until towards the end. And so most of the book is just in the middle of this whole society that these girls have created for themselves. And they're raised to do it. They're compared to each other all the time. They're compared to former Eves. They're called Eves. They're compared to former Eves who have gone on to be companions. Everything is about their looks. They are not educated. The only education they get is how to please men. It's horrifying. It's terrifying. And it's, again, just kind of too real. Anyway, I gave this 4 stars. It's definitely not huggable, but it's important. It's an important book. It's hard. It's really hard. That's what I read in August. What did you read in August? Let me know down in the comments. And also, I want to apologize for my doggy snoring, which I'm pretty sure you have heard this entire video because I just noticed it was happening. I'm so used to tuning it out that I didn't realize it was happening here. So, yeah. I hope you guys had an amazing reading month in August and that you will have an amazing reading month in September. And I will talk to you soon. Bye! Gotta stop snoring, love.